I'll let folks trickle in here a little bit. This is Aaron Clark from Stewardship Partners. It is 1 o'clock and we are incredibly excited for the virtual version of the Puget Sound Green Infrastructure Summit. I'll hang tight and sit in silence for a moment while everybody sort of trickles in and get started in a moment. All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone. Welcome to the 5th annual Puget Sound Green Infrastructure Summit. They've tried to stop us with the blizzard. They've tried to stop us with the plague, but it just can't be stopped. This tide is turning. And I just want to welcome everybody to this and thank everybody for participating. It's a really great gesture to see all of these colleagues tuning in and participating in the work. You folks are the leaders and the doers in this region, in this field of green infrastructure, and really honestly, you're the reason that I get up in the morning and then walk 4 steps over to my computer to sit down and keep working at this every day. I'm sure many of you are in similar places with that. So going to, let's see, oh yes, control the screen and advance the slide. So on behalf of Stewardship Partners and the Summit Host Committee, I would like to acknowledge that we are all on the traditional land of the first people of this region. Tacoma, where the summit was originally scheduled to be hosted, is the traditional land of the Puyallup Tribe, and we honor with gratitude and the land itself and the Puyallup Tribe, who have been faithful stewards of the land, water, and ancient history of life there since time immemorial. Many of us are attending this summit from other parts of the region. If you do not currently know on whose traditional land you work and live, we encourage you to find out. Please take a moment to acknowledge with gratitude the land where you are and its first people. And we've included a few resources here for folks to look that up. I also want to take a moment to thank our generous sponsors for this event. This would not happen and we would not have been able to plan it twice, certainly, if it weren't for these great businesses, organizations, agencies who have been behind this. The Boeing Company, a title sponsor, and shared that title sponsorship with King County. And we owe them a great debt of gratitude. Nature Conservancy of Washington, Parametrics, the Russell Family Foundation, as well as Seattle Public Utilities, the City of Tacoma, Stantec, Geosyntec Consultants, Pierce County Parks, Jacobs, Herrera, Pierce Conservation District, MIG, Aspect Consulting, King Conservation District, Salmon Safe, and Washington Environmental Council. It's an amazing team of folks that have put a lot of muscle and resources behind this event. So we're incredibly grateful for their support, not just for the event itself, but for this field, this work that we have to do. Also need to thank our intrepid host committee. You will see Ryan Mello today as our host committee representative and facilitator for this session, who I'll introduce later. But that host committee is made up of ECOS, the Environmental Coalition of South Seattle, MIG, SVR, Nature Conservancy of Washington, Pierce Conservation District, Puyallup Watershed Initiative, the Russell Family Foundation, and WSU and the Washington Stormwater Center. And we also had an advisory committee this year for the first time, representing Sites Plus Water, Seattle Public Utilities, Department of Ecology, Washington Environmental Council, and Pure Blue. And I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the logistics folks that made all of these parts possible. So the Stewardship Partners team, especially Emma Vowles and Todd Alberson, have been working tirelessly behind the scenes and owe them a huge debt of gratitude, as well as Cascadia Consulting, Lynn and Brent, who are managing all the technical details on this session. So this is a webinar. It's a little different staring at my computer screen than it is looking out into a large auditorium full of smiling faces. I know you're out there and I see you, and I am grateful for your presence. But in this transition, you know, I want to make sure that what we do, the way that we go through this event, acknowledges the humanity of what is going on around us. We are certainly all muddling through this new world. The land has shifted under us, and it's probably never going to go back to the way it was. And we're all sort of finding our own way, and it's trying and challenging. So this webinar will be successful if you have patience with our technology. If my internet gets slow and my voice sounds like a robot in a can, sorry. Hopefully it won't happen too much. But also human realities. You may see a child run through the background of my screen. You may hear a dog bark. Same goes for all the other presenters. But we are all doing this work as people, and we're all juggling a lot of stuff. And I think we all understand how difficult that is. And I'll just say, and anybody who has a really amazing interruption in their presentation, they'll win a lapel pin from Stewardship Partners. So go for it. Don't hold back. So because this is a webinar on Zoom, just wanted to make sure everybody's familiar with the technology. I'm sure most of you have been on a Zoom call at one time or another, but this is a Zoom webinar, so it functions a little bit differently. Everyone who's here as an attendee has their audio muted and their video turned off, and that will be true throughout the session. The session is being recorded, so just want everyone to know that, and the recording will be distributed after the sessions are complete on YouTube as well as the Summit webpage. We'll ask questions through the Q&A feature, so you can see that down at the bottom of your screen. There's a chat button, a raise hand button, and a Q&A button. We won't really use the raise hand button because we have enough folks in the audience that we can't really call on folks to speak live, but we will answer Q&A in real time, both written responses as well as asked to the presenters in the panel. And the chat feature, use that for anything that's a little more technical, like you hear bad audio or you're having a hard time with the video feed or anything like that, and that will be answered directly as well. So if you need to leave the meeting, there's a little red leave meeting button down in the bottom right of your screen. And yeah, we'll start with presentations and end with questions. So at this point, I want to take a moment to open this up for a more official welcome, both on behalf of the Puyallup Tribe as well as Pierce County. So at first, I'm going to introduce Council Member Anna Bean from the Puyallup Tribe. Ms. Bean was elected to the Puyallup Tribal Council in 2018. She helped to host the 2018 Canoe Journey that year, and approaches her role as on the Tribal Council as continuously being the Tribal Council member she always wanted, the adult she always wished for when she was younger. I think that's a powerful message. And her background in human resources stemming from her love of people has kept her focused on people and relationships as the nucleus of every organization she's involved in. Anna's partner is Kirby Manzanares Jr., and her children are Kyla, Corday, Chloe, and Kirby III. And Anna, thank you for joining us and helping me welcome everybody virtually to the traditional land of the Puyallup Tribe.
Hello. Haxlahel, Osii Ab Disiayagat Chalep, Tudi D Seatsta, Anna Bean Seatsta, Spoyala Papschad. Good day, honorable friends and relatives. My name is Anna Bean, and I'm a Puyallup Tribal member, and I currently serve on the Puyallup Tribal Council. And if you are tuning in today in Pierce County or the surrounding areas, welcome to the Puyallup territory in a land since time of memoriam. I'd also like to say that attending today, the topics that are going to be covered are in line with those of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians with regards to the air, water, and land, the protection and conservation of all of these natural elements. A passion of the Puyallup Tribal Council is strategic planning. The Puyallup Tribal Council is the governing body of the Puyallup Tribe of Indians. And we are currently taking action right now to protect the future. And just recently in December 2019, we had passed a climate emergency declaration in how we will handle what we contribute to the environment, and how we are going to leave our carbon footprint for the future. I'm excited to be a part of today's discussion. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm so excited for how this was going to turn out, and I look forward to being a part of future discussions. And with that, I give it back to you. Again, thank you very much for anybody who's joining. Thank you all for being a part of protecting the environment and doing what we can to protect our future generations. I raise my hands to you all. Hoyef Chud.
Thank you, Councilmember Bean. Really appreciate your presence here. And now I want to introduce Pierce County Councilmember Derek Young. He's a recognized leader on land use and environmental issues. He serves on the County Council's Community Development Committee, which oversees matters from natural resource regulation to salmon recovery, and also serves on the Puget Sound Partnership's Ecosystem Recovery Board, and on the Executive Committee of the Alliance for the Healthy Puget Sound. He's been awarded the Pierce Conservation District Elected Official Award, as well as Citizens for a Healthy Bay's Clean Water Hero in Elected Office Award. Thank you, Councilmember Young.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you to Councilmember Bean for welcoming us. It's a privilege to be able to call the Puyallup Tribe of Indians a important partner and, frankly, a resource for me in my duties where I work on Puget Sound recovery and protecting the waters around Pierce County. I quite frankly rely on their advice, as well as other tribal partners in South Sound and the Squawies and Squaxin tribes. I want to welcome you on behalf of the Pierce County Executive and members of the council virtually to Pierce County. I'm sorry, under these circumstances, meeting in person here is not going to work out. We are making significant progress in Pierce County, and I think as a region towards protecting and recovering Puget Sound, but unfortunately it's not happening fast enough. Quite frankly, our presence here and that the Puget Sound itself as a magnet also causes it problems. And so as we grow as a region, your work is critical to making sure we can grow responsibly and in a way that's going to not lose what we cherish. I often joke that we love this place so much, we're hugging it to death. And so I thank you all for the work you're going to do today. If we were in pre-COVID times, I had planned to stick around to learn more from all of your expertise and see how we can implement that in policy. But unfortunately, I do have to run and won't be able to attend any of the sessions. But I look forward to listening particularly to my friend Ryan Mello, who always gives great advice, and he'll fill me in on the details I need to see. But thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you all here in Tacoma, Pierce County in the near future.
Thank you, Councilmember Young. Thank you so much for that. So I'm going to hand the reins over now to my friend and colleague, Ryan Mello. By way of introduction, Ryan is the Executive Director of the Pierce Conservation District. Recent, I guess I would say, retiree of the Tacoma City Council as well. A major leader and influence for me in all of this work that we do. And with that, Ryan, I'm going to hand it off to you.
Well, great. Welcome everyone who's tuning in live. We are grateful that you have made time to be with us, to learn and share, and deep gratitude to Councilmember Anna Bean and Councilmember Derek Young, both incredible leaders in our community who we get to work with all the time at the Pierce Conservation District. We're honored to be part of the host committee and planning, and I'm really excited for the next just a little bit over an hour for you to hear from some of these really amazing experts in this field of green infrastructure. A lot went into planning this time together, and I got some previews of their thoughts and their great work, and I'm really excited for what we're all going to experience together. For those that would be watching this recorded, know that this webinar will be linked and available on the website. For those that are live, we're going to go to 2:30 and end sharply at 2:30 to respect everyone's time. And we are going to be saving time at the end for questions. So I'm sorry, Lynn, I'm having problems advancing. There it is. Thank you. Never mind. The challenges of webinars. In order to, before we jump into our first panelists, wanted to make sure we ground everybody in some of the same foundation. So we're all working off of that same foundation about why green infrastructure is so important to human well-being and the livability of our communities. You know, we're all really realizing, whether it be intuitively or as you're going to hear from some of the thinkers on this panel, we're not only learning about the connection you know, intuitively, but with quantifiable data, which is really interesting to understand. I think, you know, more and more, many of our communities around the country, certainly here in Puget Sound, where most of us are really beginning to appreciate better what we have come to understand to be the social determinants of health, as we call it in public health. And our public health heroes are getting to be more and more recognized during this COVID epidemic to be really folks that we need to be paying attention to a lot more. And what we've been learning about the social determinants of health is that place matters, and that healthcare, the actual delivery of healthcare, going to the doctor, having access to healthcare, is really only about 20% about whether or not you are healthy, truly living a healthy life and have the opportunity to live a healthy life. And we know that place matters because we know from data that, at least here in Puget Sound, communities just a couple of miles away from each other can have a profoundly different life expectancy. In the Seattle area, in the Tacoma area where I'm from and live, just a few zip codes away, there can be 8 years, 12, and even 15 years in a lot of cases, difference in life expectancy. And we know that all that comes down to these factors that make up whether or not we have the opportunity to live healthier lives. And a lot goes into that, of course. You know, as an American society, we certainly spend a lot of money on healthcare. Some people call it sick care, but nearly $15.5 trillion of spending in this analysis from 1980 to 2010, and just growing and growing over time. You know, that's enough spending to for everyone in the world to have 4 iPads, as an example. It's kind of mind-blowing to think about what $15.5 trillion could spend. Again, that's only that money is spent on only about 20% of what determines whether or not we're healthy as people. Imagine if we poured that amount of money into the other 80% of the factors that give us access to live healthier lives, the ability to walk around, the ability to walk to work or walk to our errands or with our family to recreate, the ability to breathe cleaner air and not hugged up next to a freeway, breathing the fumes from cars, and stress and economic conditions and all of these other factors that make up the 80% of whether that truly determines whether or not we're healthy or not. In In our time this afternoon, we're going to be focusing on the aspect of what determines the health of ourselves and our communities, with that link between the outdoors. And the outdoors doesn't need to be the North Cascades or Mount Rainier National Park. The outdoors are when you walk outside your front door of the place you work or the place you live. And we know there are significant inequities to the access to that opportunity to walk, to be outdoors, and to have that outdoor experience, a park within walking distance, tree-lined streets, places where you actually feel safe walking with experiencing nature in different ways around you. And we know when we overlay the access to the outdoors, broadly speaking, the outdoors, we can map the life expectancy very, very tightly to those that have access and those that do not. So again, we're going to hear more from some folks a lot smarter than I this afternoon, who have spent their careers really thinking and quantifying about the importance of the access to outdoors. Again, I really want to stress people's thinking during our time together. The outdoors is not just far-flung, beautiful wilderness areas. Again, the outdoors can be right out in front of our own front door of our workplace or home. But we know by having access to these kinds of outdoor places, there are measurable improvements in physical activity because you have access to it, mental health, human well-being, the social cohesion of our communities, and certainly quantifiably cleaner air, which has a direct result to our public health. And we're going to learn a little bit about some of those programs and policies to put some of this academia into action in our communities. We're also, so like I said, we're going to hear from some experts who have helped design some of these spaces to get at what the research has been telling us for some time now. So with that, again, we have a powerhouse lineup for you today. Some of the most really interesting thought leaders in this space about the good and the bad, about the social impacts of greening up our neighborhoods, greening up our communities. There are a lot of pros and good things, as I think many of us know because of the work we do. And there are some con sides to this equation that we need to be very eyes wide open about. And some of our speakers are going to speak to that. So I'm going to hand it over to two individuals who are going to kick us off this afternoon. First, Dr. Sean Watts. He's the owner of SM Watts Consulting, works to empower communities to drive environmental and land use policy, and helping historically white-led organizations move from awareness to action to create an equitable and inclusive environmental movement. Tag teaming with Dr. Watts is Bobby Cochrane. And Bobby is the partner for community resilience and innovation at Willamette Partnership. The partnership is a nonprofit that supports communities across the West. Think about the role of nature in our built environment, health and resilience. Bobby is also a Robert Wood Johnson Foundation Culture of Health leader. Sean and Bobby, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Great, Ryan. Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay? Great. And Sean and I will be doing this work together. So I'm Bobby, and midway through here, Sean will jump in. But Ryan, thank you for that intro, and thank you again all for being here. More than any other time, health is top of mind. We need to be thinking about health of our neighbors. We're reminded about just how essential workers are, how essential workers are and always have been. And a big part of us thinking about our health is thinking about health holistically, just like Ryan mentioned. A big part of our health is determined by how we live, where we are, the institutional context in which we live. And green space and green infrastructure are part of that, but so is housing and transportation, access to education, ending racism, a whole range of different aspects that all drive health. And we're going to talk about some of the work that Sean and I have been doing with the National Recreation and Parks Association nationally on what are some policy options that local government, state governments, and the federal government can take to look at green infrastructure, particularly around health improvement. So in terms of thinking about health and policy, we think there's a lot of opportunity for incorporating green infrastructure into health policy if that policy takes a holistic view on health. So for example, this is the World Health Organization's definition of health. So health is not the absence of disease. So if we're able to beat COVID-19, which we will, that's great, but that's not going to promote health overall. There's a lot that we need to do. So that's the complete physical, mental, and social well-being. So that's the frame we took throughout all of this as we looked at every one of the 50 states relative to policies that connect green infrastructure and health. We conducted a number of different interviews with city parks departments and other leaders in cities across the country. We did a complete literature review around where green infrastructure and health is connected and how media is covering green infrastructure policy. All of that is being put into resources that are up on the NRPA website right now that creates a policy action framework as well as an advocacy toolkit so that local, state, and federal stakeholders can advocate for those green infrastructure policies that promote health. And some of the key principles that we found, regardless of what form of policy that we're looking at, is that if you're looking at recovery actions that are meant to promote health and create space for green infrastructure, we need to really be thinking about health in its broadest definitions. We need to be thinking about multiple benefits. So green infrastructure that reduces flood risk and reduces displacement, green infrastructure that's procured and developed in a way that creates job opportunities for youth, places that allow you to socially distance, and places that allow you to convene and create community. And those need to be community-centered. So communities, particularly the folks who have been most impacted, are able to define what green infrastructure is important, what it needs to do, where it is, how it's maintained, all of those kinds of things. And for us, green infrastructure is really an important part of resilience in the sense that it's flexible, in the sense that it's responsive to human needs. And that's almost true for any kind of policy. So as we're making any kinds of infrastructure decisions, we need to be thinking about kind of addressing those fundamental inequities that are rooted in 400 plus years of history of trying to keep people separate and apart from moving progress together. And thinking about those approaches that are flexible are important. And community-centered is one way of thinking about addressing those deep inequities. And so, Sean, let me pass it over to you, and I'll move slides here for you to kind of root us in what we're talking about relative to equity.
Yeah, thanks, Bobby. And so, you know, if we're to achieve any of this, achieve health through nature, then we need to consider all of this through the history that has set up and perpetuates these inequities. And I'm not sure if folks are familiar with this study by the Institute of Policy Studies in 2016 that suggested that Black families would take 228 years to amass the current or the 2013 wealth of white families today. And that is because of this history. And I think it's important to understand the policy context within which we want to make these helpful improvements with that front of mind. So after almost 250 years of chattel slavery, we have 100 years of Jim Crow, which I think of as a crucible for kind of developing the policies and norms and practices to perpetuate oppression just below the legal threshold. And then since the 60s and the civil rights movement, Jim Crow
has hidden out in many boardrooms and institutions. And so this kind of constant and perpetual generations after generations of unequal access to education, business opportunities, employment discrimination, racial bias in the criminal justice system, and homeownership, which remains one of the most significant contributors to wealth generation. Discriminatory housing practices, capital for down payments more difficult to receive and access. And even when they own homes, people of color suffer disproportionately from collapsing housing markets. We've seen that in every housing market collapse that we've seen in our history. And that's particularly relevant today because this inequity is part of why we haven't been resilient in the face of COVID-19. Black and brown and low-income communities have been hit disproportionately hard, both in terms of mortality rates and economic hardship. And the folks who are entering into this crisis, the most vulnerable, are going to also emerge being hit even further back. And so this kind of constant and chronic stressors continue to expand or deepen the inequities and disparities in this country. Next slide. And so we see this in, oh yeah, it's a touchy trigger. Just one example of this kind of legacy of historic disenfranchisement plays out today in the early 1900s with the Homeowners Loan Corporation maps of redlining maps where the least desirable areas, this is a map of Seattle, both of them are, and on the left you have the Hulk maps indicating the least desirable areas for loans in red and yellow, the warmer colors. And those map on pretty strikingly with redlining or with displacement today, or displacement risk today. And you can see that the north part of Seattle was annexed in 1954, and so there are pockets of that displacement risk and undesirability that emerge from the kind of lack of services and infrastructure investment over the past half century. Next slide. And so here we see, nature is arguably one of the key amenities that well-off neighborhoods have in abundance relative to lower income communities. And here in this map of Seattle, you can see the darker fill colors for the polygons are high POC, people of color, and low income and low English proficiency. So the darker blue areas. And those map on pretty closely with the warmer dots, which indicate low vegetation cover. So, this is just one set of layers that demonstrates the connections between a wealth gap and a nature gap. And we have to reach a stage where socioeconomic status does not determine your access to nature. We need both affordable and housing and affordable neighborhoods, as well as livable and green neighborhoods. You shouldn't have to choose between the two. And so we need to really consider our policies, in particular things like green stormwater infrastructure, in that context. And open space has to be a component of development planning as we move forward. And so nature access is not simply a luxury or a nice to have, but it's directly linked to health outcomes. And so again, we need to consider this holistically. Next slide. And one example, one thing that's top of mind in many communities is green gentrification. And this is defined by some as environmental improvements or greening efforts in lower income communities that may result in increased property values and displacement. There's a lot of debate over the causality or whether or not this is correlation versus causality, but to someone living in these neighborhoods, that is irrelevant and academic. There is a fairly tightly demonstrated link between these kinds of improvements and increases in property values. Realtors use that as an advertisement for housing and improving areas. And in many communities, there's a significant proportion of residents who are actually opposed to improvements like this. Would rather stick with badly maintained fields because they know that those improvements are going to bring attention and higher use rates at those fields and higher property values, and that they're going to be pushed out. I moved 4 times. I lived in 5 different places growing up between the ages of 10 and 17, trying to chase down, not me, but my parents, trying to chase down affordable housing. And these are the kind of signals that I remember indicating when we were about to have to move. It was improvements to the local park system and new housing. So again, all of this is to underline the fact that we need a kind of a cultural revolution in how agencies, academics, and nonprofits approach, engage, and plan and partner with communities. And so we tried to drive our work with the National Recreation and Parks Association on this policy toolkit and communications toolkit with that undergirding, the policy principles. So just very briefly, next slide. I don't have time to go through the details of this slide, all the background, but if we're considering how we need to approach working with communities to best support them and minimize the negative impacts of gentrification, you have to start with trust. That's the first step. And this is a cycle, as you can see. You have to be constantly building trust, but you have to start with trust by meeting people where they are, both literally and figuratively. You have to show up before you're on the agenda and listen and hear what the community actually needs before you talk about what you are there to do, what your ulterior motives are. We need to understand what the needs are and then map what policies and improvements we can offer and support and facilitate with the needs of the community. Community engagement is about balancing what, being honest about what you can and can't do, with as Bobby put it, kind of an optimistic realism, about what needs doing and how we can support that. Need to compensate folks for their participation. We need to build their capacity so that we are, wherever possible, we are investing in community resident contracts for administration and event planning. Investing in community capacity means asking the question of whether or not they're going to be better off when you leave than if you never came. Will they have more jobs and power and cohesion and influence? Will they be there to enjoy the benefits of the planning and policy improvements that you're suggesting? And authentic partnership. Communities know best what they need most. We need to move from on behalf of to bringing communities to the table, from public comments and requests to participate in planning and provide input to direct investment, giving communities the money to actually partner with the agencies and nonprofits that are trying to work in these communities. And don't speak for communities unless they ask you to. So, now more than ever, we need to reform policymaking and implementation at all levels of government by investing deeply in community engagement. Like I said, the folks who entered this crisis with the least stability and the thinnest margins are going to emerge knocked even further back from the cumulative impacts of this crisis: economic, health, environmental, and so now I'm going to hand it back to Bobby to present how we tried to undergird the policy recommendations with these community-focused principles. So thanks for that. And take it away, Bobby.
Yeah, thank you, Sean. And I think just staying on this slide and building off of where you just left us, Sean, as all of us here on the call today, as we're talking to governors, as we're talking to our congressional delegation, as we're talking to legislators, there's federal actions and recovery actions that are being crafted as we're speaking. And if you look at the cycle that Sean just put together here for us and the key points that he made, that's how we're going to build resilience. And so for anybody that hears shovel-ready projects, let's throw that out the door right now. We need to be thinking about how we're building the social infrastructure for broader flexible resilience, of which green infrastructure is a part of it, but the process of how we do it is just as important, and just as important for building health. Because I think one of the things that we've seen is a number of systems cracks that were already there not only have widened, but have been revealed. And so for some of the principles around equitable recovery that we're starting to talk about with our congressional delegation is those same principles that we talked about up front with three key pieces added. One is community-centered, so that communities are most affected are the ones making the decisions. A lot of our water utilities that we're talking to are hunkering down and trying to figure out how to cut budgets and deal with lost revenue. This is exactly the time to start thinking about how you reactivate those relationships with community and not hunkering down. Putting money into the hands of community coalitions. So there's a number of utilities that we're talking about that are setting up community funds, thinking about revising their procurement procedures so that you can put youth back to work, thinking about other maintenance and job corps, civilian conservation corps kinds of jobs. And now's a good time. You don't have to just fix the shit that broke. We can start crafting what the future systems are going to look like. You have some of that flexibility. You're going to have some more of that flexibility. So think about what you've done in the crisis that you like and just keep doing it. Let it become normal. Some of the specific policies that we put in the NRPA work, I won't go into detail on some of these, but in terms of federal, we can authorize nature and all sorts of federal funding. So whether that's the upcoming Water Resource Development Act, whether it's CARES 4, whether it's HUD or Department of Transportation funding, there's a whole series of Medicaid Section 1115 waivers that actually gives Medicaid the authority to pay for trees in some states. And we've just finished an inventory of which states are talking about social determinants relative to housing, education, open spaces, food development, all sorts of workforce development policies as well. At the local level, thinking about how you can kind of fund master planning and watershed management policies that allow for more intergovernmental, interdepartmental coordination, meaningful community engagement. So can you use your 2% for the arts to actually fund community engagement? So plays, theater, other things that actually have people have a conversation about green infrastructure and water, and then investing money where it's needed most. So I flew through all of those things really fast, but Sean and I'd be more than happy to talk offline with other folks as we get into more detail. And the policy action framework and the advocacy packet are likely to be up on the NRPA website here really soon. So this is the website that we'll leave you with, and then happy to take questions at the end after all the speakers go. But Ryan, thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate it.
Bobby and Sean, I have like 17 questions that I want to ask you. But as you said, we are going to save them for the end. Thank you for starting us off with some really important information, thinking about fundamental inequities, community-centered spaces, and some really practical thinking about how policy and planning can come into the real world here. So I know we're going to have some questions for you here at the very end, but thank you for kicking us off so well and for the work that you're doing to provide toolkits for the rest of us across the country to pick up and go. So who knew that we would be talking about the intersection between green infrastructure and homelessness, but we are. Some very interesting work being led in practical land by Brice Maryman, who's our next presenter. Brice is a principal landscape architect at MIG, which is headquartered in Seattle, Washington. He's really devoted his career to designing and building beautiful places that contribute to the vitality of urban ecosystems and the health of human environments. He recently completed a fellowship exploring the intersection of homelessness and public space. Certainly very critical issues, very top of mind issues that at least those of us in metropolitan regions along the West Coast are, these are definitely top of mind issues. So Brice, welcome. We're excited to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Ryan. And just a thumbs up, everyone can see me or hear me okay here? Great. So thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Ryan. And I feel like I'm taking the framing that Sean and Bobby set up, and instead of wading into the shallow end, we're gonna dive right into the deep end here in talking about the intersection of homelessness and green infrastructure. One of the reasons why I love participating in these conversations is because what becomes immediately apparent in these green infrastructure conversations is that we are a community of people who see the connections between the built environment, our natural systems, and ultimately the downstream effects that affect both the natural world and ultimately us as human animals occupying the physical and built environment. And I think that attuning to those connections is precisely one of the reasons why so many of us are attracted to this work and are excited about, you know, the old rubric of the three-legged stool, that we are combining environment, economy, and equity concerns together. And I think we've certainly focused on the environment and the economy piece as we've sold green infrastructure. And I want to spend a little bit of time today thinking about the equity piece with the specific lens of this population, which is America's homeless population. In 2019, any given night in America, there were upwards of 565,000 people experiencing homelessness. And the predominant place where we're feeling that impact, as Ryan alluded to, is here on the West Coast. And I think for those of us working in the field, working out in our natural areas and within green infrastructure, we're seeing primarily the effects of the group that is represented by the orange dots, which is nearly 205,000 people every night who are the population of unsheltered homeless individuals. And I want to tie that group of people back a little bit to what Bobby and Sean laid out, and Ryan as well. In terms of equity, the African American population in the United States is about 13% of the people. 40% of the homeless population is made up of African Americans. Similarly, in King County, the Native American population makes up less than 1% of the overall population, but they are represented at 10% of the total homeless population. So when we talk about equity and we talk about those multi-generational impacts, this is certainly a manifestation of it. And it's also a point where we can begin to attack it today and redressing some of those environmental concerns. So what I want to frame up, as stated, my training is as a landscape architect. I'm someone who sees the downstream impacts of homelessness playing out in our public spaces. But a couple of years ago, I did get a fellowship to really explore these issues. And I spoke to all of these people who really live and breathe this work of homelessness and public space and public policy. So many of the insights I'm sharing are thanks to these folks, and you can listen to the conversations with them on the Homeland Lab podcast, which is on iTunes or other platforms. Today, I want to make three distinct invitations where our interest as stormwater professionals may interact and be acted upon in terms of where homelessness intersects. And the first invitation is a care for public health. The second invitation is a care for purpose. And the final one is a care for survival. So I'm going to walk through those three for the rest of the time here. Governor Gavin Newsom down in California at his State of the State address in 2019 said, "Our homelessness crisis is increasingly becoming a public health crisis." He went on to list out that hepatitis A, trench fever, Shigella, and typhus were affecting unsanctioned encampments in California. And he shakes his head and says, "Typhus, a medieval disease in California, the sixth largest economy in the world in 2019. And one of the reasons why we're seeing that crisis happen, that public health crisis happen, is because we have a lack of sanitation. So for example, the city of Seattle had an audit done about a year ago that said that based on the number of unsheltered homeless folks we have in our community, UN standards for refugees would say that we should have 224 publicly accessible 24-hour restrooms available to folks. what that audit found was that we actually have just 6. And the public health implications of that and the stormwater implications of that are pretty staggering. Some quick math here. 1 gram of feces has about 100 billion bacteria in it. The average stool at 226 grams times the 6,600 people experiencing homelessness and thirst in through Snohomish counties equals 50 quadrillion opportunities every day for fecal contamination of our waterways. You multiply that out over 365 days in the year, it becomes a pretty staggering public health and stormwater implications. So what do we need to do to address it? I mean, one of the first things is increasing our access to restrooms. And it's certainly something we've been struggling with the last couple of weeks with the coronavirus crisis. This is an example, one that was just recently installed in Ballard Commons in Seattle, one of the hotbeds of kind of unsanctioned homeless encampments. It's a Portland Loo style restroom that our office helped with. It has blue lights, so it discourages intravenous drug use. It has the louvers that allows you to see in and is built to be bulletproof. It is taking a lot of use because we have so few of these restrooms. We really need to scale up the deployment of safe sanitary restrooms. We're also seeing phenomenal innovations coming out of some of our public sector agencies, including Seattle Public Utilities, which is trying this pilot project called the Purple Bag Program, which is essentially a trash pickup program from unsanctioned encampments, so that you have control of the waste stream coming out of those, including 5-gallon buckets filled with all kinds of nastiness that are getting picked up instead of going into stormwater sewers, instead of going into our urban forests. Of course, the coronavirus has even heightened these concerns. And in the last couple of weeks, been working with a group out of the University of Washington at the request of the Real Change, which is the street newspaper here in Seattle, to think about ways that there could be a deployment of sidewalk sanitation stations that could be used in this public health crisis in a safe, effective way, so that people who are living on the streets, who don't have anywhere else to go, who don't have access to the community centers, the park restrooms, the libraries that they once did, could at least wash their hands and be sanitary in that way. So the second conversation I wanted to tee up was an invitation to care to create purpose. And I've never been in a green infrastructure conversation where the conversation hasn't quickly veered towards maintenance. How do we maintain this porous pavement? How do we make sure that the plants are going to survive? Who do we call when something dies and we need more mulching or more weeding? And I think there's really an opportunity here for this workforce, the potential workforce of some of the members of the homeless community to begin to find purpose in caring for others. And there's really phenomenal examples out there from cities like Denver, Boise, Fairfax County, Virginia, where people who have been told their entire lives that they're someone who doesn't have value to society are finally given the opportunity to contribute, and contribute in a very meaningful way where they actually get to see things grow and live and thrive. I think there's an opportunity here to fill in that third leg of the stool and combine the profound environmental benefits of green infrastructure with these really deep purpose-giving opportunities in terms of reviving people's lives and getting them back on a better path and being better versions of themselves. Now, the final piece that I want to talk about, the invitation to care for survival. I think we've all seen images like this. This is an image from down in Southern California of an encampment cleanup in one of their natural areas. And we all get frustrated by it. We get frustrated at the people being there. We get frustrated for the failures of public policy. We get frustrated that the natural systems are being impacted as bad as they are. Unfortunately, this is a logical choice of so many decisions that these people and that we as a society have made, where these are the only spaces available to so many people who are living in tents. You ask folks who are living in forests, where would they rather be? upwards of 90% of them say they'd rather be in a more stable living situation. And what these folks are telling us when they're living in these spaces, they're actually sending us a signal that, you know, they want to be in spaces that are have some sense of community. You can see the clustering of tents here. They have a sense of shelter. They have a sense of hygiene, often with waste streams that are separated from the encampment itself. And in this instance, they have a sense of security because they're surrounding with fences there. What frustrates many of us is that the places where people choose to camp are often very unsafe. They are perhaps in critical areas. They are at the top of a steep embankment like this one is. They're in places that people shouldn't be living, no matter what their economic situation is. So part of the strategy that human service providers say is that housing first is the critical strategy to get people back on their feet and in a safe spot. And part of that is diversifying the housing opportunities available. So what I wanted to suggest and make an invitation to is that we might think about how we could deploy some of these housing first strategies in ways that benefit our green infrastructure assets. So for example, all those maintenance and care purposes on street side rain gardens, could those perhaps be an opportunity for the thousands of people we now have living in RVs to set up an RV steward for a block or a series of blocks that gives that person purpose, connection, training, a connection to nature and a sense of empowerment. The trade-off being we give them a little bit of the public space for them to live while they maintain. Or for our parks, is there an opportunity for the deployment of tiny houses to begin for people to become stewards of particular sections of parks? Maybe they are maintaining swales through the parks or porous pavements. And finally, our urban forests, which have been so impacted by invasive species, maybe there's an opportunity for these light footprint dwelling units to begin to be part of the key for stewards to begin to take over and restore those portions of our urban forest. These are just triple bottom line solutions that will not only help our green infrastructure systems, but also help these people who need a place to be. But more broadly, I think that there's an intertwined fate between homelessness and public space. You know, we've seen these social service cuts over a number of decades now, which we've seen as increased homelessness has taken root on our streets, increased negative impacts to public spaces, which leads to a decline in civic trust. And we've all heard, why should we build X when it's just going to be taken over by people who are homeless? Which then leads to a reduced willingness to invest in public infrastructure. And that impacts all kinds of investments, whether parks, whether green infrastructure, whether roads. That erosion of civic trust really begins a downward spiral. So what I want to suggest and leave you with is that we can design better policies, systems, and environments that invest in people, invest in our public spaces so that we are decreasing homelessness and having fewer negative impacts and increasing civic trust so that our green infrastructure and our civic infrastructure grow together so that we have the kind of outcomes that we all want in terms of our built environment, in terms of our watersheds, and in terms of the people who we call our neighbors. And with that, I'll turn it back over to the next presenter. Thanks, Ryan.
Thank you, Brice. Love the language around caring for purpose, caring for survival, and the thinking and language. It's just very powerful thinking. Thank you for that. And I learned a new number that I never thought I would ever, 15 quadrillion. I need to wrap my brain around what 15 quadrillion is. Want to remind folks that we are taking questions at the very bottom of your webinar screen. There's an icon that says Q&A. Feel free to pop in questions there. If appropriate, the question will be answered in real time, right at that moment, if it's appropriate to do that in writing in the chat, in the Q&A box, or we'll be queuing up those questions for our presenters at the very end. So please don't forget about that. And I also very much appreciate our presenters weaving in some thinking about the very relevant and appropriate times we find ourselves in with this pandemic. So thank you for your thoughtfulness on this. Our next presenter is Jordan Wildish. Jordan is a project director at Earth Economics, headquartered right here in Tacoma, Washington. Jordan works making the economic case for nature-based climate mitigation and adaptation investments. Making that economic case is so important to often policymakers, especially in this time of really limited, scarce resources as we head into a likely recession, right? So prior to his time at Earth Economics, Jordan was an Environmental Defense Fund Climate Corps Fellow and has a master's in public administration from the University of Washington. Jordan, welcome. We're excited to hear your thoughts.
Thanks, Ryan. Can you all hear me okay? Great. All right, well, thanks. My name is Jordan Wildish. My topic today is on the public health impacts of green infrastructure, specifically looking at urban heat islands.
Jordan, you're muted by accident.
There we go. I'll try it again. All right. Earth Economics is a nonprofit based in Tacoma, Washington. We work broadly on quantifying the value of ecosystem services and using these values to make the case for and find funding for green infrastructure. So before I get into the role of these green solutions, I want to first talk about urban heat islands and describe the challenge we're trying to address. So the urban heat island effect causes cities to be especially hot, exacerbates ongoing climate change. Primarily, this is driven by large amounts of heat-absorbing surfaces like roofs or blacktops that kind of trap heat, and also not much vegetation like trees or grass that would provide evapotranspiration, which is kind of like natural air conditioning. So the impact of this is that heat islands have a real impact on human health. Extreme heat is the deadliest weather-related disaster in the United States. In fact, as global temperatures have risen everywhere, they've gotten especially hotter in cities. So we saw about 1 degree Celsius in temperature rise over the past century worldwide, but we saw an additional 1 to 3 degrees in urban areas due to this heat island effect. This has a very real impact on human health. There's a lot of negative impacts of heat islands, from higher energy bills. Some cities even see damage to infrastructure like roads buckling due to extreme heat. But the biggest cost, and the one we focused on, is on this human health aspect. Extreme heat can dramatically increase the risk of cardiovascular and respiratory health problems. In fact, studies found that mortality rates rise significantly during heat waves, and even more so in urban areas. As we go into the summer facing COVID-19, heat islands may be especially dangerous, not only because these heat islands exacerbate respiratory problems, but also because the places where people could go to get out of the heat, like movie theaters or restaurants, are now closed. And findings vary a little bit, but most studies show that temperatures above about 82 degrees Fahrenheit is the threshold where we see these health impacts start to really accrue. And low-income areas are especially at risk for these health impacts, as well as people in high-risk age groups, which is over age 65 or under age 14. We've been working to develop a model to identify these areas of greatest heat island risk and estimate the health risk, and also estimate the role of green solutions in mitigating that risk. Our method uses several sources of satellite imagery, existing mortality and heat models, and also census data. We wanted to focus our research on having actionable recommendations, not just finding the hot spots, but showing places where an intervention could do the most good. So we look at things like not just the heat islands, but also where populations that have the lowest income, highest populations in those high-risk groups, and highest density, to find places where putting in some green infrastructure could do the most good. So here in Seattle, we can predict the localized temperature at the census block or block group level. This is a temperature map of Seattle on a composite of the 10 hottest days of last year, 2019. The areas outlined in black, if you can see, experienced, Seattle across the board experienced 21 days of above this heat threshold of 82 degrees Fahrenheit. But the areas outlined in black experienced 50% more days above that threshold. This is a very real health risk because all-cause mortality is so much higher on those hot days. We estimate that the health costs due to these heat islands in Seattle was more than $47 million last year. And I want to highlight that last year was a comparatively cooler year, so this number could be much higher on a hot year, a hot summer. And in Seattle, like many other cities, we see a correlation between income and temperature. Higher income areas experience lower temperatures and vice versa. Not only are low income areas more likely to be in heat islands, but low income residents are more susceptible to health impacts, at least due in part to less access to air conditioning. And we see a similar story in Tacoma. In fact, the areas highlighted in black experienced even more days above that heat threshold, 80% more than the surrounding area. And the public health costs are estimated to be in excess of 9.7 million. And this is, again, a cooler year comparatively. And we see that same relationship between income and temperature. We see this in cities across the US, but especially true in Seattle and Tacoma. So now onto the solutions side. Green infrastructure is an effective strategy to mitigate urban heat islands. The primary strategies here are converting impervious surfaces like rooftops or roads to vegetative space, green roofs or bioswales, which reduces the amount of absorbing surfaces, those heat absorbing surfaces, and also increases evapotranspiration. Another strategy is installing urban trees and green roofs can really reduce local temperature. Now I'll dive into the numbers here in a second, but I want to highlight that the concept which is that green infrastructure can really have a tangible reduction in urban heat, in addition to all the other benefits we know about, from capturing stormwater to rising property values. It's really kind of one of a suite of co-benefits we're seeing. So a study in Portland, Oregon found that installing urban trees along sidewalks and parking lots and installing grass on exposed soil could reduce local temperatures by anywhere from 1 to 4 degrees on the neighborhood scale. And then adding in green roofs to that and some albedo services on roads could lower temperatures by as much as 5 degrees. This is a really important finding. It shows that these green interventions, even fairly modest ones, can have a real impact on local temperatures and thus on public health. So our model seeks to do the same sort of analysis. This is an example of a neighborhood in Seattle. It's especially at risk for these heat impacts. We're modeling a 10% increase in urban tree canopy. And we're showing that would decrease mortality on these hot days by 2 to 4%, all-cause mortality, and reduce the number of days above that heat threshold by about 20%. This would accrue at approximate $56,000 in public health savings in 2019. Again, a cooler year, so more in a hot year. This is just for an 8 to 10 block neighborhood. So this is a small scale intervention and a fairly modest one at that. Addressing heat islands is especially important in the context of climate change. The number of days in the Seattle area above that heat threshold has increased by 50% since the 1980s. A study of 3 US cities found that the deployment of green infrastructure can effectively mitigate between 40 to 99% of this projected heat increase risk by 2050. So these green strategies can really have a meaningful impact on reducing the public health costs of rising temperatures in cities and save hundreds of thousands of lives. So I want to close here on next steps. We're working to partner with more cities to complete these analyses to inform decision-making and mitigation strategies. We believe that by providing these targeted analyses, we can make the case for more urban GI and also help identify areas where urban solutions can do the most good. We're working to integrate air quality impacts within this analysis. We know that these interventions, urban trees and green roofs, can also significantly reduce air pollution. Air pollution and urban heat islands are closely related and often co-occurring and can sort of make each other worse. And air pollution is another critical public health challenge, especially crucial as we learn more about the relationship between air quality and COVID-19. And finally, we're working to develop a decision support tool to evaluate the financial case for green infrastructure in the Puget Sound based on social, environmental, and economic impacts, including urban heat island mitigation. We have more information on that on our website. And I will wrap up here. Thank you for your time. I would love to chat more about any of this. My email is at the bottom there, and I'll pass it back to Ryan.
Jordan, great work. Love the work of Earth Economics. We're lucky to have you based here. And what I always love is how you continually take what is intuitive to us and quantify it so that we know we're not going crazy. Great work. I know that there'll be some questions here after our final speaker. So our final presenter, and then we're going to get to some questions here, is Dr. Kathleen Wolf. Very excited to hear her this afternoon. Dr. Wolf is a social scientist at the University of Washington College of the Environment. And she's been doing studies on human perceptions, attitudes, behaviors with regard to urban forestry and ecosystems for her entire career. So for about the last 25 years or so. In the past 10 years, she's focused on urban greening and human health response to trees and canopy and green in our community. Her really recent work has been about how to integrate nature and health knowledge with local planning. And as of October, Dr. Wolf entered the Interdisciplinary Research Leadership Fellows Program at the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. Dr. Wolf, always great to hear your thinking. Take it away, please.
Thanks, Ryan, and thanks to all of the other presenters as well. Voice okay? Coming through?
Coming
Good,
through.
thank you. Good. I am really honored to close this panel and to offer some ideas that really intersect quite a bit with what some of the other speakers have said. And we are in a time where I believe that the awareness of nature and its value in our lives has been heightened. People are out walking, they're just clamoring to get into the parks. There are more cyclists. Cities are closing streets to offer more space to walk, be outdoors, and so on. And let me just speak a little bit about mental health. Feedback, informal feedback I'm getting is that mental health is a particular concern during this time. The isolation, the loneliness associated with shelter in place. And so, again, value of green spaces in our lives now. Can we take this additional awareness, this additional understanding, self-realization of the value of nature in our lives and convert that to future policy and action, as some of the other speakers have suggested, and they've offered some very tangible, practical approaches for that. The role of nature, again, as a healing element. For instance, the Legacy Health System in Portland has a series of healing gardens, and they're making them available only to the healthcare workers, the frontline workers, and not patients. Again, recognizing that these workers, these people who are serving those who are sick, need solace, respite, and the restorative qualities of nature. Greg Bratman is a colleague of mine at the University of Washington. He and colleagues recently published a review of the role of nature and mental health. This figure shows they're complicated, they're more detailed. Review of the bulk of works, the collection of articles that they found related to this topic, and it includes the amount of time we're outdoors, it includes the level of exposure, what types of places we encounter, and then there's a range of different effects, some physiological from mental or mental health responses. But I'll simplify that by saying nature plays two fundamental roles in health. And Bobby and Sean started early with the World Health Organization's definition, go WHO, little political comment there. But anyway, general wellness, the protective aspects of nature, they promote wellness, they promote those activities and experiences that maintain wellness and perhaps prevent us from having to go to the doctor or to a formal care system. But then if we are ill, we have a disorder, something that's been diagnosed, nature offers therapy and treatment in some respects, offsetting perhaps expensive treatments, expensive responses within our healthcare system. So here's a summary then of the different functions in terms of mental health that are provided by nature. Again, ever more important as we are in shelter in place and this experience continues, that nature is now being recognized, as someone said early. It's not just a luxury, it's not just nice to have, but is profoundly important for human well-being and function. So I'm often asked to or provide presentations about the range of nature and health benefits, acknowledging again that idea of nearby nature. While the occasional visit to a national park, to a large reserve, and we have an abundance of those beautiful public lands near us, nearby nature is the basis of many of these benefits: parks and gardens, trees, forest canopy, and green stormwater infrastructure. And inevitably, almost every presentation that I do, the following Q&A includes this question about gentrification and displacement. Does this, including or improving nature in our communities, does it more than signal, but does it prompt a profound change that can be detrimental to some populations? So from here on out, as a scientist, I often speak with conviction from fact and evidence. I'll tell you right now, the rest of my presentation is speculation, because this question of gentrification and displacement is a wicked problem. An urban planner wrote a paper a number of years ago describing the wicked problems of urban planning. They are difficult to define. They have no easy solutions, but they're important enough for bright people, collections of people, such as those of you on this webinar, and having attended these conferences in the past, to work through, to think about, to talk about. So this is yet another image of the disparities of green availability in our community. So that was a map of Seattle. Other studies all over the country, if not the world, have revealed displacement. Well, first of all, disparities in availability and access to nature, be it forest canopy, be the locations of parks, and then this possible dynamic associated with addressing those disparities, providing more parks, providing more tree canopy, and what might be the consequences for certain vulnerable populations and certain communities. So let me offer some historic perspective on this. As with Brice, I have studied landscape architecture, professional degree in landscape architecture, and what I've learned, one of my favorite topics in school was understanding the history of urban planning and landscape design. And I think we have to keep in mind that there are structures much bigger, much larger, far more dynamic than our activity with urban nature as to what is happening with the shift in communities or the shift in neighborhoods. So planners have physical form in mind when they set up very large scale projections and scenarios for our cities. And that's been happening for over a century. Ebenezer Howard's Garden City, Le Corbus's Radiant City, and then Frank Lloyd Wright, who really projected suburban development in a way that just took off like wildfire in this nation, more so than other places, and has had incredible consequences for economics and health. Sorry about the delay here. There we go. And then we see over this time, not only are urban planners projecting form on the city, projecting form on built space, but they are also, we also recognize and okay, sorry here, we're getting back. Aaron's laughing. He's enjoying this tech glitch on my part. And we go forward one more. Let's see how this goes. But this next slide, as soon as it comes up, shows the change, the dynamics of cities. Cities are not static. They are the places of creativity, of enterprise, of economics. And one gentleman pointed this out for one city in Brazil. The Nature of Cities is a website, wonderful essays from people all over the world reflecting on urbanism and urban change. But the point is, our work with regard to urban greening is nestled within much broader economic and social dynamics. And not to extend our reach and our discussion about these concerns of gentrification and displacement doesn't get at some of the root sources. In addition to these very broad scale dynamics and changes, there are also studies and activities that recognize the very personal, at home, in community perceptions and relationship that people have with urban space. Image of the City is one of my favorite books written by Kevin Lynch, where he and his students analyzed across multiple US cities how people related to the city. What was their cognitive map? And then this map of life under lockdown being done by City Lab is soliciting people's input, their sketches of their relationship to space in cities while they're during these COVID-19 times. So in terms of gentrification and displacement, there are policies, we've heard about this, some opportunities, but I would suggest that this goes beyond environmental policy. It goes to the financial policies, the fiscal policies, and the planning policies of our cities. So how do we engage with that more actively? Academics are addressing these concerns as well. There's just a real flush of articles of late talking about inequity, disparity of green access. And one article in particular by Jennifer Walsh at UC Berkeley and her colleagues have positioned this idea of just green enough, recognizing the context of the community, cultural context, socioeconomic context, to inform the greening within that community and making it more reflective of those values and the long-term characteristics of a place. And so I'll end with this list. Again, I don't speak from conviction. I speak from a deep interest in this dislocation potential of urban greening. And it is a wicked problem, and I'm reading, learning, and hoping that ongoing discussion beyond this webinar, I can continue to learn from all of you. But I once did a presentation in Oklahoma, a city in Oklahoma, and there was a team of people addressing this idea. And it was the landscape architect of the city working towards parks and trees, but it was also a finance officer of the city, and they were working together. And so here are some potential strategies. First, integrate cultural and social context rather than having the designer or planner drop in with the grand schemes, which has happened in the past historically with cities. But again, authentic community collaboration to make those green spaces that are reflective of place. But anticipate those economic undercurrents. Again, greening, I think sometimes is treated as a scapegoat. Oh, a new park came in and now gentrification is happening. I suggest that that park arrival is part of a much deeper and longer term change of dynamics, economics within the city that we need to learn more about. Can we buffer the economic impacts? Can we buffer property tax increases or rents? Can we perhaps buffer the change of businesses that are often associated with those deeper currents of change? And that includes creating jobs and retaining them within the community. I'll end with that. More questions than answers, and look forward to, again, discussion within this panel and beyond. Hopefully when we're all able to meet again in person, I would love to continue this conversation.
Thank you for your always stimulated thinking, Dr. Wolf. We appreciate that. We are going to get to a question or two in the time we have remaining. I do want to make sure, though, that everyone remembers that this is a 9-part series. Part 2 is this Friday. Believe it or not, the topic is about big, bold, new ideas, as if we haven't heard a lot of big, bold, new ideas today, but there'll be even more. So you can grab your lunchtime webinar on big ideas this Friday, May the 1st. If you need to, you can get more information at the website 12,000raingardens.org, 12000raingardens.org, if you don't have the information for part 2, and sign up for parts 3 through 9. Dr. Watts, we're going to come back to you with a question. Something that's been woven throughout our entire time together is about displacement and gentrification. So Sean, can you share a little bit of some tax and fiscal tools that you're aware of that could shield residents from those property tax increases due to the greening up of our communities and that sort of thing?
Well, I'm going to tap Bobby to come step in as well. But in general, I mean, I think that this is the underlying complexity of the situation that Kathleen and Brice were alluding to, that we have to bring in a number of different non-traditional kind of sectors in thinking about GSI. I mean, we can manipulate tools like real estate excise taxes. We can work on community benefit from projects, but I think a lot of these innovations require testing and response and evaluating the response and the in the community and the benefit to the community. One of the approaches that I've seen work really well, and from which emerge kind of tailored solutions, are interdepartmental teams that are like beat cops, essentially, that pull in Department of Economic Development and Planning, as well as the more traditional folks like parks and public utilities, that are deeply embedded in communities and working with community-based organizations and the kind of grassroots leaders to listen to the challenges they're facing, so that you can kind of have these multiple insights into developing the right sets of tools. Bobby, you want to take it from there?
Just to add that I'm hearing a lot of conversations about sequencing different kinds of infrastructure, so that greening might not be the first thing that you do. Might go in and kind of secure community anchor assets. So securing the park, securing the community center, securing minority-owned small businesses. Then coming through with affordable housing, then thinking about greening, and lastly, transit. So don't put your transit in first. So I think that's another strategy. It's not direct fiscal policy, but more coordinated planning.
Thank you both for that follow-up.
Well, I was also going to add that just, I think, thinking in terms of economic development and support, so that folks have greater opportunity to earn wages that will allow them to stick around. So what Brice was alluding to, these are things I've thought about forever. The idea of developing kind of that economic development in place to help fend off the displacement that inevitably occurs with these improvements. Job training programs that allow for kind of ladders of capacity development, individual capacity development, and continually improving jobs. And this kind of infrastructure investment can really benefit communities if it's done appropriately. And Aaron, you wanted to jump in as well, right?
I wasn't going to add anything specific. I was just going to wrap us up when the time is here, which is now-ish.
I think the time is here. One last quick question for Kathleen. Kathleen, there's some fascination about which organization is soliciting sketches for the lockdown maps you mentioned. Can you share briefly?
I'm sorry, the lockdown maps?
That's a message that came in the chat.
It was the pathways to the creek.
Pathways to the creek.
Just a few slides back.
I think it was from City Lab.
Oh, yeah, it was City Lab. Yep.
Oh, yes. Yes, it was from City Lab. And let's see, what's the, they're calling it the map of life under lockdown, and some fascinating sketches. These are all coming from people who are making use of outdoor space. Well, not just outdoor space, there's some maps of their homes as well, their patterns of movement through their homes.
Thank you for that. Great work to all of our presenters, amazing work. Aaron, we're gonna hand it back to you to take us home.
Great, thank you, Ryan. Thank you, everybody. It's always great to see your faces. It's great to see so many friendly names on the attendee list as well. It's much appreciated. Ryan already told you about the next session on Friday. We're trying to have sessions. We roughly have one every Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the next 3.5 weeks. So looking forward to seeing more folks there. A lot of related topics, a lot of things you heard raised here will be touched on in later sessions. As Ryan mentioned, 12,000maringardens.org/summit is the page for all your information, including agenda. And I'll just thank again our speakers, host committee, sponsors, and especially all of you for showing up and attending this first session of the Green Infrastructure Summit 2020 online. With that, I will wrap up, and I think probably our tech team will stay on for a few minutes to record all the chats and all the questions to make sure we get that included in the recording that we send out later.